This is CheloniaCast episode 21. Thanks for joining us. You can find us at theturtleroom.org/CheloniaCast, or you can learn more about our program and access the CheloniaCast Student Research Fund. Today we're joined by Scott Thompson again. Scott is currently a researcher in the Museum of Zoology at the University of Sao Paulo. He's also working at SEQUA, as well as has done a lot of other things with Chelonians in terms of systematics, nomenclature, and even discovering species and such. And we are also joined by Lucas Maya, who is currently working at the Amazonian Institute of Science and Technology on characterizing differences in matamatas. Today we'll be focusing on the genus Chelis and speaking to variation and kind of holistically talking about Chelis. It's going to be a really interesting discussion. So thanks for joining us, guys.
So, why turtles? How did you get into them, and why turtles over other groups of animals and such?
Well, everything started when I was a child. I really was interested in nature and in animals. In fact, my mother had a tortoise named Hercules, and I spent all my days playing with it. And also, I watched a lot of programs and cartoons, movies that showed scientists, biologists in the field, and it was like a passion growing. And then when I grew up, I entered the college to forest biology. But in when I was studying at the school, my favorite subject was science too. So I decided to follow this career. And back in 2017, I just met SEQUA because it had a lot of presentations in here with many professors. It was the first time that I knew Dick as well, Dick Hogan, and a friend of mine used to work in here, and I asked her how could I get in, and in fact I haven't decided yet at that time that I would be working with turtles. And for my lucky, I just got here and I got really passionate about it. I started to research, to read a lot more. And with a common conversation with some friends from here, Sabrina, that it's a person that also works in here, said to me, don't you want to work with Matamata? People usually don't like it, and it doesn't have many things about it. So I started to research, to read it, and it was a species that really attracted me. It was pretty different, the characteristics, the um, comportamental aspects, and then I started to um, do some things with it. I wanted to comprehend what people thought about it and what uh, were the science lessons that we could research more about it and comprehend a lot better about this animal.
Yeah, it's a cool study organism. I imagine a lot of people they're pretty world famous when it comes to turtles, and just due to their appearance, which is pretty interesting. So, what specific kind of work are you doing? Kind of characterizing? Is it morphological difference or anatomical, or what are you looking at specifically?
Right now, we're looking at the external morphology based on osteology. We're looking at the characters of the plastron and the carapace as well, and the head. So we do know that there are differences at the shape, the color, at the patterns, not only because of the literature, but also by living with the people that uh, lives in the field, because they always says to us that they are pretty much different, and this was a starting point to try to uh, dig a little more deeper to understand why they would have such difference in morphology.
That's pretty interesting. The recent species split that occurred, was this something what kind of went into that? That was pretty interesting to see. Not something that was for someone that's in the United States. I wasn't following that work up to date, so it was pretty interesting to see that. Was there any information, I guess, behind that species split before, or what kind of led to that, if you know, or kind of how does your work relate to that?
Mhm. I think that Scott may help me with this one as well, but there were a lot of discussion in the past about being not only one species, but people kept as just one, being different of the differential was the region where they were founded. And so it was always this one were founded in Orinoco Basin and this other one in Amazon Basin. And that was pretty much the difference, but kept as Calus fimbriata. And then at 2020, it had this work that showed that were not just morphological difference, but also genetic ones. And I think that Scott can talk a lot more about it and what Pritchard had to about the species.
Yeah, basically, it does go back a long way. The idea that there were two species at least, and of course there are also numerous fossil species, Columbiana San Luisite, for example. But the idea was that there was a difference between the Orinoco and the Amazon, as Lucas said, but there was also some problems with that in that technically the Rio Negro, when you get west of Manaus, does actually have a connection to the Orinoco. And it seems that there were possibly turtles getting through that. And so you've got a bit of a mix. And uh, in the end, they did the genetics and it showed up pretty well. But, and they split it between Orinoco and Amazon, but there's still more to do. And I mean, Peter Pritchard in his Turtles of Venezuela, for example, did actually talk about this. And then Ramirez, what was it? Ramirez,
Venezuela?
yeah.
Vargas Ramirez.
Vargas Ramirez, yeah. Vargas Ramirez et al. They used molecular work to split them. And but there's still probably more to do. It's not as clear as that. I mean, Orinoco is clearly a separate species, and it's great that it's now separated out. But within the Amazon, there's also differentiation that Lucas is getting at, and it seems to be possibly water type or anything like that. It's important to understand that the Amazon is, in a way, a barrier. The main channel of the Amazon is so big that turtles like Matamata can't cross, and they are found in the tributaries, but not in the actual main basin. And so to the north and to the south of the Amazon, and different types of water types, there's different types of morphology within the Fimbriata itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. Too, I'll cut this out, but Scott, maybe you could turn the camera when you talk to, because it was a little bit low, the volume. I think it's coming in one side. Yeah, if you guys just want to yeah, move around a little to get, yeah, sorry about that. That's just, we want to make sure that it comes out well. But okay, yeah, I think that, go ahead.
I was going to say, I find it interesting how the just the main channel of the on can actually serve more than helping certain turtles increase their distribution, because this is not like that here for the most part. I mean, other than like the Mississippi River, there's nothing that really comes close. And I mean, even the smallest turtles here can utilize the main channels of the rivers. They're not as massive as the main channel of the Amazon or anything like that.
Even here in Manaus, which is a long way up the river from the coast, it's what, 2 kilometers or 1.5 kilometers across the main channel?
Yeah, I think so. Or more, depends which month of the year it is, because we do have the dynamics of the river as well. When it's raining a lot, the river floods and enters at the forest, and then it comes back and it depends a lot of it as well. The matamatas are not pretty good swimmers, so they can't pass through that barrier as well.
Right. So directionality of the river influences where they can disperse. That makes sense. Is there you were talking about I know that in the captive keeping sector, there was a little book that was published on matamatas. I forget who the author was, but I read that a while back, and they pointed out that there was kind of a plastral coloration difference between the Orinoco and Amazon populations. So it's more extensive than that. What are some of the, if you don't mind talking about this, maybe this is kind of under wraps for now, but what are some of the other differences, maybe anatomically, or like maybe the feeding apparatus? Is that something that would be different? Their feeding mechanisms, or
Talk about black and white water.
Yeah. Yeah, there's difference between Orinoco and Fimbriata that we know. Not only the plastron color, but the shape as well. The shape of the carapace. I think that there's a paper from 1995 from Sanchez Villagra that shows it. That one, it's more. I think Amazonian basin, in fact, has a more square or rectangular shape of the carapace, and the Orinoco one is more oval. And there's also difference between white waters and black waters here in Amazon region. We're checking that, in fact, and we have two exemplars in here, one from white water and one from black water, but they are pretty much different. They had features that are distinguished. And in fact, we do not know if there are different mechanisms or apparatus of feeding that differs, but they seem to be pretty much the same thing. That vacuum system that Matamata uses, and the jaw that's not very strong for biting, but it's extremely, how can I say, adapted.
The jaw doesn't close completely when they eat, so the water goes out. The fish doesn't, as I was saying.
And
they're not.
The fish or the other animals, and they have this pretty interesting way to do it because it has a long nose that looks like straw. So the other animals confuse it with a worm, and the matamata is pretty much blended at an environment. It has a powerful camouflage. So when the fish or the other animals get close, they um, just make the vacuum mechanism to get fed.
Yeah, it's an interesting. The mechanics behind it are pretty interesting. I think some people have dealt with that in the past, but the something I recall that's pretty interesting about that is a hyoid structure and how extensive it is. But maybe one of you could talk a bit more to that and how it kind of differs from other turtles and maybe what the functions of it are, or the musculature of the hide. Oh, here we go. Yes.
Oh
Wow.
wow. Cool.
The hyoid of a matamata.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is massive.
What was the initial
that a-
size on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, was that a really large specimen to begin with?
Yeah, this would have been I don't have the actual animal that this came from, but it would have been around 32, 33 centimeters in length, possibly as much as 40. It was a large animal, but what they have is extreme. This is in pieces, so I'll bring up one part of it now. This section here is behind the tongue. The tongue would have been there, and this is extremely elongated. And if you look on the other side, there's a tube up here where the windpipe goes down. But what's important for them is these structures, which are extremely enlarged and elongated, and the other two pieces went on the bottom here. And they support a very large musculature of the throat, allowing the throat to expand. So there's basically a tube going down the mouth that is big enough to swallow. In an extremely large animal, it could swallow a 10, 15 centimeter fish whole. And it creates a large amount of negative pressure within the throat. So it sucks in fish is the term I guess a lot of people use. And then they close it up. But it's also important to have a lot of musculature to close because they want to be able to close the throat and push all the water out without losing the fish. So it actually takes a lot of pressure to do that as well. And so it's an extremely powerful apparatus. And in a regular turtle, and this one's in pieces, that's the same piece in a short neck. I mean, it's close to nothing.
These are the branchial horns and the two pairs of those. That's the structure.
Yes, it's basically the part that it's a bone that is literally behind the tongue. And I mean, humans have them too. We have a hyoid bone as well. Our mammalian one is very differently structured. But all mammals have them as well. They are used to open up the throat so that you can breathe and control swallowing versus breathing. And the epiglottis is connected to it as well. But it's highly modified in the long necks, snake necks, Kelis, Kelodina, and Hydromedusa.
It looks a bit like the Ketra. Ketra have it pretty developed, I seem to recall, because they have a similar.
It is also highly developed in Ketra. Yes. And also in, to a lesser degree, but it is highly developed in Amida and a couple of the other genetics as well.
Yeah, the piscivorous species makes sense that they're going to be using that pretty proactively. How about the kind of the jaw musculature that isn't involved in kind of the lowering of the mouth, like the hyoid isn't creating that pressure? What is the situation with maybe the adductor muscles in the head? I think that's different, right? Between cryptodires, plerodires have a difference there, but matas have kind of a special arrangement. What is that?
The jaw muscles of a matamata are actually not that powerful. I mean, you can get bitten by a very large matamata. It will hurt. I won't deny that, but it's not going to tear your skin off. It's not like getting bitten by a snapping turtle or something. I mean, until they're about 20 centimeters in carapace length, they'd probably be lucky to break the skin because that's not the purpose of the jaw. They don't chew, they don't bite. And the purpose of the jaw is to create, like baleen does in a whale, a barrier that water can go through, but food can't.
In fact, there's a paper comparing the power of the bite of the other species and the Kelus. And in fact, Kelus has a very weak jaw compared to the other ones. So it has to be pretty much adapted to get the feeding because it doesn't bite, it just sucks. So you will be not harmed, as Scott said, but it has his own features to maintain itself in the environment.
Yeah, I seem to recall one of the papers in the Trina, they described kind of the cranial anatomy, and they mentioned that the external adductor muscle is kind of it's positioned in a way that it has three different joints in a pulley system, whereas in cryptodires or plerodires, it's not like that, and there's sort of a cartilage that's in that external tendon that helps it glide when it's pulled back, I guess, contracted. That was pretty interesting. The matas seem to lack that, but I think that paper was based on small specimens, but maybe that's not the case in older individuals. I think it seems like there's a positive information there. Yeah, but it's definitely an interesting the external anatomy. And when it comes to the kind of the orientation of the vertebrae, is there something that's sort of unique there? We spoke on episode 19 about the fact that the Matamatas maybe aren't as long neck as we think, but is there an advantage to that in terms of creating a vacuum or?
Yeah, the vertebrae of the Matamata, they are somewhat long, as I said the other day, but they're nowhere near Chelonia's or Hydromedusa. They use their necks in a completely different way. And basically, the Matamata slingshots its head out. It's capable of doing that if it needs to, but it doesn't have the range of strike that a Chelonian has. And the neck is, to be honest, it's very Phrynops-like. And so it has somewhat of a long neck, as in it can get a bit of reach, but it doesn't have the power and movement that a Chelonian has. And the neck muscles are more designed for locating the head over striking the head. And this is a big difference within, even just within Chelonian. If you look at longer collar group versus expansive group, the neck muscles of the expansive group are literally designed to push the head forward. Is what they do, and they have very limited musculature between the vertebrae, allowing fine movement. So, like our fingers, for example. Whereas the longer collar group have large muscles between the vertebrae and smaller muscles along the vertebrae, and so their necks are more designed to do a lot of fine motor movement. Fine motor movement for the longer collar.
That's because they're kind of prodding around the substrate as opposed to creating that vacuum. It seems like there might be a trade-off between the length and width of the neck in terms of creating that, because the volume in the esophagus is so it's so hypertrophied when the Matamata opens its mouth. Maybe there's some sort of trade-off there. That's why the neck is not as long as in other species.
There is a trade-off, yes. Basically a turtle can be a strike feeder, or it can be basically a poking and prodding feeder. It's very hard for them to do both, although the Matamata seems to have tried to make a bit of a balance in comparison to the Chelonian.
Interesting. Are there any other sort of anatomical features that are pretty unique in Matamatas? Morphology obviously is pretty unique, and maybe you guys could speak to why it's beneficial. But before we get there, maybe is there anything else that stands out anatomically?
With other species for sure, and within the Matamatas, we think that maybe distinguish format of the head, because there are more some specimens that looks like to be more shaped like an arrow, and others that look like to be more rectangular. But we do not understand pretty well if there's a biased way to look at it. We needed to do the statistical tests and other measures to comprove it. And there's also difference in the shape of the plastron at the anal scutes that we had to see it. It has the differential at sexual dimorphism, because the females are way bigger than the males, and the males have this part of the plastron right here. In the males, it's concave, these two, so they can land upon the female to copulate. So this is one of the ways that we know it's a male or female, and this format as well varies. And we need to check a lot more about it, because it has difference. And also in the number of the, how can I say? Pyramid. Yeah, it has a slight difference from 12 or 13. And that's also a feature that's pretty interesting. Very flat head. Yeah, and the shape of the head, they have a flat head. And what we do think is that this measure may be varying to create that more arrowed or more rectangular shape of the head and neck.
It's interesting that that's the case. The angle of the head is so obscure. I mean, my first guess as to why that would be in some way to facilitate prey acquisition and creating that suction. I think that one paper that dealt with this looked at that too. There were kind of slight variations in feeding patterns depending on where the fish was in the water column. Certain individuals would orient their heads at like a 45-degree angle upwards when the fish was above them, but when it was straight across, they didn't really move. Is that why would there be differences in terms of the shape? Is that maybe feeding ecology, or is there something functional to that?
One thing I've found with mattermatters, certainly in certain populations, and just one is an example of it. If you look at, all right, let that focus. If you look at the angle of the quadrates, okay, so this one's coming in this way, and then the other one is coming in this way. So in most turtles, that's 180 degrees across the skull, whereas in these turtles, it's angled forward. And the reason you would do that is the same reason primates have their eyes in the front of their head. It gives binocular hearing, so to speak, or the hearing is overlaid. They can hear with both ears things that are in front of their nose. Basically means that they can tell where a prey is by sound. And but not all mattermatters have this to the same degree. Whether that's something that is a feature of the mattermatters that live in whitewater versus clear water, I'm not sure yet, but it seems that different populations of the mattermatter have potentially better hearing than others, and they can hear in completely in water that you just cannot see through. So they're basically hunting by sound. Yeah.
Right, I've heard that.
Do you mean differences in just single populations or between the two species? Or is it just within each species there's variation in that? Like,
no, Orinoco doesn't do this, but within the Amazon, and it's highly possible that the Amazon is a species complex. I don't know that yet. I could be wrong, but there are major differences between different populations, and they are actually very significant.
The regions here in Amazon, they differ a lot because of the types of river. In Blackwaters, we do have low biodiversity, and we cannot see a lot because of the color of the river that looks like a T when you look in a recipient that you can see it through, because of the leaves, as the whitewaters have more like a sand color because of the geographical formation, as the clear water are pretty much transparent. And there's also some kind of hierarchy that we do found more callus in black waters and white waters than in clear waters. So the other things that those rivers differs is on pH, the chemical composition as well, electricity, the current, the way that they are flowing. So there are pretty much variables on it that may be interfering as well on those populations.
Yeah, I've heard that mattermatters have a pretty well-developed electrosensitive capabilities, kind of those skin flaps. I don't really know if that's been quantified though, but what you're saying about the angle, the quadrate, maybe facilitating hearing would make more sense. Because as we've even talked about last episode, turtles certainly have the capability of hearing pretty well. So that's a pretty interesting thing. When it comes to the electroreception, is that something that has actually been studied to your guys' knowledge, or
Not I'm aware of. It's quite possible, and there is evidence in other groups, other animal groups where having those sorts of frills on the face and stuff like that does mean they have some electroreception. But whether that's true or not a matter, I do not know.
Yeah, I didn't found anything with that, but what I don't know is because of the things on his neck, he can sense a little bit more and better the things that are happening. So he can lead the way with it as well, with this apparatus and with the hearing.
You've got to recognize this is a species that can hunt in water and you've got 1 centimeter of visibility. So how's it
Right.
hunting? It's
Yeah,
hunting
exactly.
sound, electricity, touch. It's not using sight.
Right,
First would
right.
be
When it comes to humans too, right? We use a kind of a plethora of different senses, but these are developed for an environment where we can actually see things, and that's kind of the main predominant sense, right? But they could have a whole different set of senses that are employed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unique. I mean, to just turtles. I mean, what the vipers that can hunt, catch bats as they fly out of the cage just by the feeling of their body heat as it goes past. And sharks can electro hunt. It's there's lots of sensors that different animals use in environments where visibility is not possible with the one that you would use. Our species is evolved to use sight a lot, and so our hearing and touch and everything like that is actually more limited compared to our sight.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I think that's pretty interesting to think about, and maybe we could talk a bit about the paleontology of Keyless. There's, I think, some stuff known about this, but it's still sort of ambiguous. Maybe you could shed some light on what's known and how that kind of lends itself to the biogeographical theories that are current. Does it sort of make sense?
Yeah, the fossil history of Kelis is it's quite extensive, actually. I mean, turtles, thankfully for us, actually do fossilize quite well. They're hard, so we do get a significant amount of fossils. And in the region known as Acre in Brazil, there are the fossil of Kelis columbianus and Kelis lewisi. And there's also some other fossils out there that may be another species. And there's fossils from Peru as well, and Colombia. There's currently only two described fossils, Columbianus and lewisi, and they're both ancestral to the modern Kelis because of the arrangement of the bridge. If you look at the bridge on Kelis, is very short. It's only covering 3 right? And that's extremely short compared to any other turtle. You pull any other turtle out and it'll be covering 4. They've also shortened this part of the plastron. The pelvis is actually right on the edge of the plastron. Let's see if I can do that.
The pelvis is fused, right? That's pretty.
All the way to the end. That's also not true of any other Thuridae. So they've shortened everything.
That's interesting.
Columbianus and lewisi do not have those features.
Okay, so there is sort of an anatomical difference. And Columbianus and lewisi too, they were sympatric in terms of where they've been described. Is that something that we should worry about when it comes to fossils? I feel like that is a little bit suspect, but are there noticeable differences between the two?
I've not had an opportunity to compare them. I've looked at Columbianus before in detail. Lewisi is a bit more difficult to work with. It's not been, all the matrix hasn't been cleaned out of it. But it may be the same species, it may not, I don't know. I mean, if we can get a CT scan done of the holotype, we'll see. Maybe Gabriel Ferreira is working on a lot of the fossils, and so he may do that at some point. And he identified Columbianus in Colombia as well, but also other taxa. And the one in Peru is not any of these.
Okay, that's good. And so how does that lend itself to the current theories of how they dispersed and how they're kind of the ranges work now between the two species?
I would imagine that what you've got to also get with the Amazon Orinoco is that the Amazon's a very new river, and before it there was the Orinoco, and the Orinoco had a huge west draining source, which included what is now some parts of the Amazon, and the whole western area below the Andes, but out even towards about here in Manaus, was basically a swamp, which was the headwaters of the Orinoco, and it then flowed north and then east. And then you've got the shield, the Guyana shield and the Brazilian shield rise up, and that split the Orinoco into what is now the modern Amazon and the Orinoco. Tellus is probably a remnant of that old Orinoco system. Similar thing I said about the Renemis yesterday. And these are turtles that live around the borders of that large swamp that formed the headwaters of the Orinoco and then got split apart by the rise of the Guyana shields. And that's why it's now got two species. So their history is from the old history of South America prior to modern visualization. The Amazon didn't exist 60 million years ago. It wasn't there.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense. I guess for Lucas, what is it like? So you're actually going out in the field and studying these turtles, or are you just dealing with what is kind of the dynamic of your research, and what is it like to find these turtles in the wild, that in situ?
In fact, it's pretty difficult because they blend pretty much to the environment. They have colors that look like a lot with dead leaves and also with the color of the rivers. If you consider the black rivers and the white rivers as well, in the black rivers you can see the thing it's right in front of you, like a distance of minimum 5 centimeters. You will not be seeing pretty much, and you also would be not seeing the matamata. Um, we can catch them with traps and also with um, actual searching, but this would be much more difficult. People that lives in the areas knows it pretty well, so they can find it, but it has always some kind of struggle because of it. And in fact, we do have some here that were caught by some fishermen and other people that lives in the rivers, but it's very difficult because of it, because the resemblance with the environment, as I said before, and because it's a very quiet animal, it doesn't move a lot, and it doesn't go out for bathing, so just stay in the column of water, and when it's needed to breathe, it just elongates um, its neck and puts the nose on the surface, and the nose it's pretty elongated as well, like straw. So they breathe and just retract the neck. So all those features make it harder to catch them in nature.
In terms of trapping, how do you do that? Do you use like hoop nets, and what do you bait them with or something? If that's, I'm assuming that's kind
Yeah,
of
we
the way.
put nets on 5 nets with a certain um, high and special and width, and we wait a little bit. Matamatas always stay in a place that's not too deep because of it. They don't clean well, so they can't move around pretty much. And we go see in a in a break of 30 minutes or 1 hour at the maximum because they also do not have great breathe apparatus that can hold it for a long time. So we do it. If we were lucky, they would enter the net and stays in there. But there's also a way that people catch here that's called um, something like little net that they call stingrays as well. It's a square thing, and there's a net, and they just put in the river, and then uh, pushes up, and it sometimes has some fish, some turtle, and other animals as well. And there's another way that people get matamatas. It's with a tool that's called, the common name is zagaya. It's like a spear that they throw to the animal and then get the turtle as well.
That's interesting. You mentioned too one thing that was interesting early on, that the snout might be used as sort of a lure. That's kind of similar to the snapping turtles that we have here, except that they have that on the tongue. Now, I imagine the tongue would sort of be not energetically efficient for creating that vacuum. So maybe, but the nose at the same rate, probably not the best if it gets bitten off. It's that. What's the theory behind that?
As we said before, matamatas doesn't have a strong bite, so their mechanism of defense is basically throwing up when they feel threatened. They just regurgitate the food entirely or partially, and they also have musk that's pretty stinky, so people doesn't like to deal with them because of it as well.
Do you want to see the black and the white form of the matamata?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Sounds
Let's
good.
do this.
This is black, right?
Yeah.
This is a black water.
Not a white.
Oh,
It's
this,
from
sorry, this is a white
Amazon
water.
River.
Move back a little bit.
Or it's from Itacoatiara.
This is a white water form of the matamata, and it's got a very bland coloration.
This one's a female.
Yeah, female.
There you go.
Don't invite me. It's very shaped, very long
Yes.
snout.
Look at that.
And if you look at it, try.
This one's a big one.
I hope she doesn't bite my phone.
Oh, wow, you can see her eye clearly too.
Yeah,
Oh.
and it's very camouflage.
Probably don't know if I couldn't get it in time. Oh.
That is the ultimate fish eating machine.
Yeah, look at
Ultimate
that.
efficiency. There we go. We got. This is, here we go. Here's.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's,
Yes, that's a pretty significant difference.
yeah, that's actually, that is.
She's really upset with me.
This is the Orinoco.
No.
No. This is a Amazonian whitewater form.
Okay.
So it's Amazonian.
Yeah.
Yes, they're both
this,
Amazonian.
This from
Look at the
Blackwater, and it's a male.
It has the pointed rear of the shell like the Orinoco form.
Interesting.
Wow.
Is that closer to where the Orinoco and Amazon meet? Is that where that was found, or just random? It's not. It's more, I guess, black and white water.
That's the ultimate.
Vinegar at Whitewater, Blackwater Junction.
I don't know. It doesn't have the insult.
Okay. This one's from the Rio Negro. It's nowhere near the Orinoco.
Okay. Yeah, I find it fascinating how they can reduce all the vibrations in the water when they're pursuing a fish, just based on the dynamics and how the head moves and over the course of milliseconds. But it doesn't seem like that they leave any sort of kind of water disturbance beyond just the movement of the head. The vibrations that would kind of radiate out from setting up that posture don't really exist. Maybe that might not be the best way to explain that, but
The other thing to notice on this one, if I can get her to agree with me, I'm hoping she'll agree. If you look at the top of the head, it's a completely different shape over the years.
I see that. It's more kind of truncated, right?
And as we said before, that it has a very powerful camouflage. This is the neck and the head, and this is a dead leaf, so it looks a lot like it. So in the river, they would be covered on it, and we could not see it, any of the animal.
Right. So there's no other sort of functional it's just camouflage. There's not maybe something less intuitive that morphology helps with.
I think a lot of the fringing and the
carapace as well.
And the carapace is about camouflage. I mean, obviously they are probably also using it a bit in defense, against large catfish, especially in Mekong. But for the most part, it's camouflage. Fish will swim up to them and just don't know they're there. And that's the last fish ever knows.
They're pretty quiet, so they stay untouchable because of it. You do not know they are there. In fact, otherwise you're looking for it.
Are there any spots you can snorkel for them?
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's a better question, Michael. I want to see that.
Places you could snorkel and just find them.
There's more occurrence in two places near Manaus, that's Barcelos and Santa Isabel do Rio Negro. In fact, Dick found it there one time, I think that was 23 or 26 specimens at one day, at 2 days in fact. At one, they found 20, and the other, they found the other 3 or the other 6. So, and there are two places, those two places are probably places that if you are looking for matamatas, it's surely that you will find it.
Okay, well,
There's
that's...
work up on the Tocantins. He's getting a fair number of them in the Clearwater up that way.
And do you is there any variation in their adult size between populations or between the two species? And what is the maximum size that they can reach? Because I know they can surpass like 60 centimeters in carapace length, but that's about the end? Or
bigger than that. There's one in the CRI that was around 60 centimeters, and it's probably the biggest matter I've ever seen. But I've seen them from the Amazon and the Orinoco up at that size.
So it seems to be pretty consistent.
Yeah, I don't think there's a significant difference in the maximum size between the two species.
One thing I noticed going through I went through the CRI, I think all of the matamatas to take pictures to send to you guys, I think. Hopefully, I think that I emailed them. Well, we can deal with that later. But one thing I noticed was that a lot of them were sort of kind of misshapen in a lot of ways. That could have just been due to damage, but I think that Pritchard got a lot of them from zoos, so maybe the captivity messed them up. The bones. I don't know.
From when I was curating that collection, yes, there was a significant number that came in through zoos of matamatas. He also had a significant number that were wild collected. With the matamata, I would certainly not utilize any of the ex-zoo, ex-captive specimens for certainly morphometrics, because it will just mess up your data. They do tend to get quite deformed in captivity.
I imagine they're pretty sensitive too. That's interesting.
Very sensitive to diet, extremely sensitive to overfeeding, and it does mess up their shape.
Right, that's interesting. When it comes to the conservation status, is there much known about this? People maybe want to avoid them because, from what I hear, they don't taste great. So,
Killers tend not to taste very good. One thing they have in their favour is their musk glands. It makes them taste terrible. But I can gather they would seem to be relatively within their environments as long as it's not too disturbed. It is a difficult turtle to assess because they're hard to find, and honestly, a lot of people don't work on them. They are not the spectacular turtle when it comes to conservation and things like that. People are interested in documents and things like that, not interested in killers for the most part. But I don't think they're in any great danger at the moment.
Yeah, I think when it comes to it, we could say that the pet trade maybe should be affecting because it's a pretty different species, and in Asia and other countries, they are pretty appreciated. And the other problems that would be loss of habitat and the pollution and people invading the place where those specimens live. But in another way, people do not tend to eat them. First, because it's very difficult to find, and second, because the most meat that they have is in the neck. So in other parts, it doesn't have it a lot. So people that doesn't tend to go after them because it's much easier to get Unifleas and Expensa and other members from the product names. So there are some people that had told me that they have eaten matamata, but not as the first option, just because occasionally they have found it. And there's also some registers that the people use it as some kind of medicine for breathing problems and for hemorrhage as well, but that doesn't have scientific background on it. It's more like a traditional knowledge.
right, as is mostly the case with turtles, I think. That's interesting and probably good that they're still fairly common. I think most people that's a refreshing thing when you're talking about turtles. Definitely not.
Yeah, I think they're common. The main areas where I'd be concerned about them is where they're put in dams. I think dams would wipe them out in that particular area, not necessarily all over the place, because they're not great swimmers. So once the water levels go up, they lose a lot of
And there's also the difficulty in captivity to the reproductive problem with them because people have tried before. There are some papers on it, but has always been unsuccessful because even though they act 2 or 3 days, the hatchlings die. So there's also this difficulty if hypothetically they disappear in nature and only had left the ones in captivity.
Okay, that makes sense. Interesting. Well, I think that's. I mean, I've covered a lot of the questions I feel like we've had, but I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in here with anything. But
I'm good.
all right, I think it's me. We can do a little round of Matamata trivia if
Oh, wow.
you guys are up to this. I think there's maybe a lot here, but we could do a few questions just to give listeners the most obscure thing possible, and us. We're curious too.
You want me to start?
Sure, go ahead.
I actually think this is a cool fact because it's a bizarre turtle in a lot of ways. And so this was what is the oldest illustration of a matamata?
I think I've seen it, but the date on it, oh geez. I'm gonna throw out a number here. If anyone's got another guess, go ahead. I'm just gonna throw something out. 1788.
Anyone else?
I'm not touching that one. I don't know.
You got
You go.
You're actually very close. It's 1772, and yeah, it's that was the first one drawn in a paper by Bouguer in France, and it's such a bizarre turtle in its appearance that when it actually did find its way to Europe, it got drawn. Although the first description of a matamata was from 1741, and that one's not valid, of course, because it's pre-Linnaean, but it is the first time.
It would have been interesting to have been there when the first person pulled one up. I can't imagine. At least the first Western explorer. Obviously, people in the Amazon have been around them for thousands of years, and it's not something that's unusual there. But that's interesting. Okay, any other? Maybe a few more. That's a good one. If you've got any other Matamata trivia, Lucas, you've got something.
Cool.
Okay, well, I don't. He's trying to think of something. I feel like.
I think that there's the question about the common name, that it's a word that repeats itself, matamata, but a lot of people doesn't know what it means. So, do you guys know what matamata means?
Does it mean like kill?
Any other guess?
Did I get that one correct? Oh man.
I don't know. You don't.
I
I feel like I heard this once.
Like ugly or something.
It's not Portuguese. It's indigenous language that repeats itself because the translation would be something like skin or leather because of the fringe. And also there's some other indigenous language that refers to it because of the neck that looks like a lot like a tree. That's also called maramara. And in the other one, it refers to the shape of the carapace that looks like a stair, a natural stair that we had here. So we have these three origin names. But me with my friends, we do in fact have a joke to call Maga Maga as Kill Kill because it looks a lot like in Portuguese.
What would be the reasoning behind? Well, I guess the leather makes sense, but the kill. I think Jason, I've seen that cited before as the origin of it, but why would that come about? Is it just because it's such a unique feeding mechanism, or why would that be the case?
Yeah, I think that would be something like that because it's pretty successful if you compare to other kinds of feeding mechanisms. Mathematics has a great percentage of getting the animal, the fish, the crustacean, or the other animal that they are feeding because and the animal is pretty close and the vacuum is pretty strong. So escape it from it's pretty difficult. So could be related to it as well.
Okay, that's interesting. That makes sense. Right, that they've observed that. All right. Well, I guess we can start to kind of wrap up. Maybe just a few more just to close us off here. What has been the most interesting thing in terms of researching matamatas that you've found, and what maybe most interesting encounter or thing that you've learned?
In fact, there's a lot of it, but I would like to bring a word from Fabio as well. He did it in his master's. It was with mercury bioaccumulation, and he can prove that Matamaras has this accumulation of mercury at nails, the skin, and the carapace and plastron. And the places where the Matamaras live, in fact, are places where the quality of the water is pretty high. So they're also animals that indicate that status. And this is pretty good because people look at matamatas and think that they doesn't have a paper in nature, that they are just ugly, and they are pushed away when you compare with the other species because Podocnemis is pretty common in here, and people tend to find it pretty um, beautiful. The colors, the patterns, as the matematas, um, people used to say that's ugly, that is disgusting, that it seems prehistoric, or a turtle that is has other turtles' parts and God just put all together when He created. So I think that shows people the importance of matamata, and the although it doesn't has a lot of things threatening, it's important to show it for the common people that it's a turtle that participates actively at the ecological dynamic, and when you come to know more about it, it's pretty interesting. And this is one of the things that led me to research about it and being so patient with this species as well.
It's a bio
That's pretty.
interface.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, and then maybe for just to wrap us up here, this could be both for Lucas and Scott. What would be like one piece of advice you would give to someone looking to make turtles or herpetology a career?
I would bring my own experience. If you're looking forward to work with it, start to getting good references. It's pretty important to do it so. Start to read it a lot. It doesn't matter what kind of turtle it is. Just start to read it. Look for some kind of lab or center that works with turtles or with college, and try to participate. Try to be a volunteer or someone that gets initial research to see if it's something that you really like, something that you enjoy, and would like to keep doing for the rest of it. And then I think naturally you will be close to some kind of uh, species, and then would be more curious, would be talking to more people, making the whole network that's necessary in science. And the more you know it, the more you want to know, and more passionate, more curious, and more hunger you will be, not only about the species that you work, but with all the turtles. And you want to know more and more and share with the community, with your friends, with your family, and with everyone as well.
I could make it really simple. I give advice to any student. Network, read, and focus. You would really need those three things. You need to be networking with people who do work on it. You need to read all the literature, and I mean, definitely read scientific literature. And you need to chase it. You need to really focus that this is what you want. Because it is hard.
All right. Right. I think that's some good advice. I'm hearing some interesting feedback here for something. I don't know what that is, but all right. Well, that's fine. I think that's Yeah, I think that that's really interesting advice, and I think really well put and concise, and as all of us as students will definitely take that to heart. And I think that people listening, if you're a student, hopefully can do that as well. So I guess we're pretty good here, I think, unless you guys want to add anything else. But it's been a pleasure having Scott on for 3 consecutive episodes. This has been really great, and we're really appreciative of the time you've dedicated to this and sharing information. And then Lucas, thanks for coming on today. It was really an interesting discussion, and I certainly learned a lot about Matematas, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, this was a memorable one.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be in here to talk about something that I really enjoy. I like it a lot, and I hope we can come back to talk more about it and the new things that we'll be discovering in the process.
For sure, we will definitely look forward to that, and hopefully there will be a follow up at some point when all of this is when your research is done and when we've got more stuff. So, thank you guys for coming on. I'm gonna stop our recording now, but I think that was really great. Thanks.